So hopefully you guys are in Nearpod. That will help. We'll also show the presentation on this screen, but like I said, there's a vote as well as an opportunity for you to put your questions in on Nearpod. So if you can open up another tab to do that, that would be very important. So our agenda for today, things we're going to be talking about: safety, the general PPE, cleaning, and protocols in the school building. What is blended learning? What is remote learning? Curriculum adjustments that BC will be making. The polls, whether you can take a vote on which model of blended learning you prefer. Very important. Frequently asked questions, we'll give you the opportunity to discuss those. And there will be an FAQ at the end where you can ask questions and we will do our best to answer them with the information that we have. So Campbell, if you can advance to the next slide. So this chart is pretty important. What does school look like in fall 2020? So what school is going to look like is you have two options at this point. You can pick a blended learning option, or you could pick fully remote learning option. So we're going to talk about those two things, okay? Fully remote learning means that your child will be home 100% of the time and will be working on our curriculum, the same curriculum that the students in school will be working on, but they will be home. The blended learning model is a model where kids will be coming to school different or varying numbers of days depending on the particular week that we have. So we're going to talk about those two options because they vary a little bit. One of the options we're going to talk about is what we're calling Model 1A with an exception, and Model 2. So if we move to the next, we'll start off with talking about what are some of the safety concerns. I know those are at the forefront of everyone's mind. We're very concerned about safety. We're concerned about the safety of students, staff, and we want to make sure that kids are healthy. So when they're going home to family, grandma, we want to make sure that we're doing our best to keep everyone safe. Okay, so if you choose the blended learning option, that means that your child will be in the school building. Now, when they're in the school building, they will have to wear a mask all day long. The only time they will be able to take their mask off is when they are eating. The DOE is recommending that all staff and students get tested for COVID-19 the week before school starts. We will be sending out a list of places where you can have your child tested. You could get tested as well. That will give you a 24-hour turnaround for test results. So again, the DOE is recommending, strongly recommending, that students and staff get tested a week prior to school starting. Again, I also want to make very clear that masks are mandatory for in-school, in-person instruction. So this is something that's very important. You need to have a conversation with your children about, because if they are not comfortable with wearing a mask, then you might want to evaluate a fully remote option, as masks are mandatory, barring a significant medical issue that a doctor is now signing off that the child cannot wear a mask. But again, that's very significant, and there is a remote learning option that you may need to take. So very important. So the DOE is recommending that you send your child to school with a mask every single day. If a student does come to the school without a mask, we will provide one for them, but they must wear it. If during the day a student, this was a question that came up about 10 times on the registration page, what are we going to do if a student takes off a mask? Well, we're going to ask the student to put the mask back on. If there is a situation where a student does not want to wear the mask for whatever reason, they'll be removed from the classroom, and a parent or representative of the student from the blue card will be called to pick that child up and take them home. Again, masks are very important. That's why it is essential that you're having conversations with your children on whether or not they're going to be able to wear a mask for 5.5 hours a day. The custodial staff will be cleaning throughout the day. If you guys can mute yourselves, that'd be ideal. Spraying and wiping down, especially high-touch areas. So that is doorknobs, light fixtures, banisters. Those things will be wiped throughout the day, and at night, the building will be disinfected. They are using electrostatic sprayers. The DOE has assured us that they're going to make the maximum number of sinks available and will provide soap. Wipes, sprays, towels, and hand sanitizer will be provided to each classroom. Thermometers are being provided to students for random temperature checks as students and staff enter the building. We'll talk more about that when we talk about entrance and exit or egress for students. The DOE, if not already, will make improvements before the start of school to the HVAC systems, and they are replacing the air filters with high efficiency air filters. Class sizes have been reduced based on the CDC's guidelines. Students will be seated in each classroom 6 feet between them. Students will be assigned a class number and a room, and they will stay in that room all day long. And we will talk more about that with the blended learning option. If you choose to do the remote learning option, students will have the opportunity and families to pick up lunch or breakfast at the school building using a separate exit. So if you do choose the fully remote option, you will still be able to be provided with breakfast and lunch. So I want to make that clear. Students who require the elevator must have it on their IEP or submit a 504 via email prior to the first day of school, because only 2 people at a time are allowed on an elevator. So we have to ensure that those taking the elevator. Hi, if you could just mute yourself. 2 people are maximum are permitted in an elevator on any given time. So that documentation must be present prior to the start of school. In order for school to reopen, not just BC, but schools in general, the mayor has said that the percentage of positive tests in New York City must be less than 3% using his 7-day rolling average. Schools will need to close if the percentage gets to 3 or above. And so that information will be very forthcoming from BC as well as on the news if those numbers ever get to that point and you have chosen to keep your child in the blended learning model. So in your mind, just keep remembering that blended learning means that your child is in school at some points throughout the week. It's not a 5-day schedule. So there was a question that was posted that I do want to address. If a student has a paraprofessional, the paraprofessional is considered a body in the classroom. The classrooms have been measured, and we have created a system in which students are sitting 6 feet from each other, either next to the next person or in front or behind. There's 6 feet of space. So each classroom will have 10 to 13 students in the room. So someone had asked if there's a paraprofessional, what will happen in the classroom? So that person counts as another body in the room. So if the room's capacity was 13, then there will be 12 students in that room and the teacher and the paraprofessional. Someone asked about paraprofessionals with it being within close proximity of students. At this time, if a student has something in their IEP that requires a paraprofessional to either escort a child to a bathroom or assist with that, that will continue because the IEP will be followed in all circumstances. So I can talk to parents about that privately if your child has an IEP, but just keep that in mind. It's very important. All right. Okay. So like we had said, the custodial staff will be cleaning throughout the day, spraying, wiping high-touch areas. There will be electrostatic disinfectors being used in the nighttime. The DOE is making the sinks available. So, and the HVAC system, they're changing the filters and they're sending people in to look at the air circulation system. So parents had asked a lot of questions about that. So I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Now, with regard to school entry and exit, if you can move to the next slide, Mr. Campbell. Okay. If you selected the blended learning model, meaning you didn't complete a survey saying you want your child to be home 100% of the time for remote learning, then that means your child is coming to the school building. So the end of August, beginning of September, you will be getting an email as well as a letter in the mail from USPS indicating which group or cohort your child is in and the room that they will be in for the day, as well as the entrance and exit door that they will use to come in the building. BC will be utilizing 3 different entrances and exits for students. So if your child gets a letter and says they're in group 621 and 621 is using the East 55th Street exit, then that's the information you're going to get via email as well as in the regular mail. And that is where your child will need to come in the morning and where your child will be released from at the end of the day. Now, outside of the building, there will be signage indicating where people should stand 6 feet apart from one another. There will be signage in the school building reminding students about masks. So please keep this in mind. When students exit the building, they're going to be urged to disperse immediately as we can't have groups congregating. There will be random temperature checks when students come in the morning. So this is something that the Department of Education and the mayor just made public to all of us, including myself, random temperature checks. So there will be staff at each of the exit doors when kids are entering the building, and we will be taking their temperature as they're coming in. And again, it is random. So that means that not every person will have their temperature taken. So just keep this in mind. Students will exit from the same door. That's very important because not only are we separating the students as they enter the building and exit the building, but we're reducing the amount of parents who may be picking students up. Now, so some time change decisions on the time school is taking place have just also recently come out. So students used to attend school for 6 hours and 20 minutes. Students will now be in the school building for 5.5 hours. So their school day, if they choose, or if you choose the blended learning option, is reduced. So at this moment in time, school will start at 8:30 a.m. for students, and students will be dismissed at 1:58 p.m. So again, if you choose the blended learning model, that is how students will enter and exit the building. Those are the safety precautions that the city has put in place and that BC will follow stringently. And you will get information in late August, beginning of September with your child's class, their room, and the exit and entrance door that they will be using. Okay, I know that's a lot to absorb at this point in time. So now as we move, slide 10, Mr. Campbell, as we move toward the beginning of the school year, which we do not have a finalized date because the calendar has not come out, but expect school to start the week of that Labor Day is. So I believe it's scheduled for September 10th, but again, a calendar has not come out. So along with the safety protocols, at the beginning of the school year, students and staff may not return to school if, so these bullet points are very important. If your child or a staff member has knowingly been in close proximity to a person who has been diagnosed or tested positive for COVID-19 within the past 2 weeks, 14 days, they cannot return to school on the first day. If a student is tested positive through a diagnostic test on their own or a staff member as well within the first 2 weeks of school, prior to the first 2 weeks of school, the child should not come to school on the first day, as well as staff. So that is why the DOE is strongly urging everyone to be tested a week prior to school starting. If a student is experiencing any symptoms or staff of COVID-19, a temperature greater than 100.4 within the past 2 weeks, they should not return to school. And if your child has traveled or a staff member internationally or from a state with widespread community transmission, they cannot return to school for 14 days from the point in which they returned. So these are the criteria to think about prior to school beginning that week of September 8th when Labor Day is. Okay, very important there. So what will happen if a student shows some symptoms of COVID-19 at school? So if a student is expressing that they're not feeling well and showing symptoms, if a teacher or staff member identifies that a student may be showing symptoms, the student will be sent to the nurse's office. The nurse will do an evaluation of the student. They're looking for fever, cough, shortness of breath, sore throat, lack of sense of taste or smell, and any other symptoms that the diagnostician, the nurse, the medical professional identifies as a possible COVID-19 situation. They will be with the nurse, okay? The nurse will contact a family member, someone on the blue card, again, urging how important it is that we get those back, to pick the child up. The nurse will strongly encourage you to visit a doctor and to have your child tested. They will also recommend the closest testing site to help facilitate that process. Now, if let's just say your child has a cough or something is going on and they are sent to the nurse and the nurse contacts you, once that call is made, your child may not come back to school unless the following criteria are met. The child must come back with a negative COVID-19 test result, and they have to have a note from the doctor that says that the child is cleared to come back to school, and the child has to be symptom-free for 24 hours. So you may be asking yourself, what is my child doing if they're not having extreme symptoms? However, their test results haven't come back, or they're dealing with a cough situation. We have the remote learning option that is a complete curriculum that is virtual. BC has been working diligently to reevaluate our curriculum and our pacing so that students have portfolio tasks, that they can have some direct instruction at home, and that there's clear projects that students are supposed to be doing. We're going to talk about that when we get to the curriculum portion. Okay, so close contact with positive cases. If something happens where there's a situation where a child has been in contact with someone outside of the school building, you can go to the next slide, Campbell. Okay, this chart is something that's all over the DOE websites. Parents have been asking, what happens if someone is sick at school? What happens if there's a diagnosed case? How is the school going to handle that? Well, if there's one confirmed case in a particular classroom, then that will be communicated to all of the people who've been in contact with that student in the classroom. And contact has been defined as being within 6 feet of the person for 10 minutes or more. So if there's a classroom of 12 and one of the students has a positive case, then all of the students in that class, as well as any of the teachers or staff members who've been in contact based on the 10-minute 6-foot distance rule, the classroom and the students and staff will be quarantined for 14 days, meaning you will get a notice from Track and Trace, which is the company that the city is using to communicate any positive cases. And your child will be home for 2 weeks, okay? They are recommended. They have to come back with a test that says they're cleared after the 2 weeks. So then you may be asking yourself, what happens if a student in one classroom in 415 gets a positive case and a student in another classroom in 421 has a positive case? And those two situations are groups of kids that have not been in contact with one another. Then both of those rooms, according to the Department of Education, would be quarantined, meaning all of the students and staff who've interacted with those two groups will have to quarantine for 2 weeks. All right. Now, if we have a situation where we cannot identify the linkage, it's a mystery how people have gotten it, there will be an investigation launched through Track and Trace in New York City, and the school will be closed for a minimum of 14 days. And again, all of this information will be communicated to you quickly and efficiently through Track and Trace and through BC. Okay, this is just, it's very important situation. So again, when you're thinking about, am I sending my child to school with the blended learning option, or am I going fully remote? What you do need to know is all of the circumstances that will take place within the school building and all of the rules that we will follow, okay? If there is a situation where your child is not feeling well and may have the nurse says that, recommends that you should go to the doctor, and you choose not to send your child to the doctor, your child cannot return back to school if you do not test them for 10 days. They have to get tested. So that is something very important. So even at the 10-day point, the child has to not have any symptoms for 24 hours before they can come back to the school. So getting tested is really important here, because it, creates an area of certainty. So now, you may have symptoms. Obviously, the fall is a time when we're embarking upon flu season. So a person could get sick and not have COVID-19, but because COVID-19 is so communicable, it is really important that everybody, if they have symptoms, get tested, and your children need to get tested. So I see that there's a question in the chat, and I know that parents have asked this question. We're going to go into what is blended learning, the entire breakdown. But the question is, if I do not opt into remote learning now, can I do it? So if you do not complete the survey indicating that you want your child to do fully remote learning, you can opt your child into fully remote learning at different points throughout the year. That is an option for you. If you opt into fully remote learning, which the deadline is August 7th, you can quarterly, the DOE is going to send you out a survey and ask you, would you like to continue to have your child continue with remote learning? And at those points throughout the year, you can then make a decision as to whether or not you want to send your child back to school. Okay, so Mr. Campbell, if you can go to the next slide. So blended learning. What is blended learning? So the chancellor has given an overview of different types of models of instruction that we can have in the school. We met with our SLT, and what we're trying to do is have the most concise types of schedules that we could put forth so that you aren't confused, all right? Because I myself have a son who's in school, and it's very difficult to remember which day and which week you would need to send your kid in. So we want to make this as streamlined as possible. So what is blended learning? Blended learning means that your child will spend some time in school and some time out of school doing remote learning. Now remember, the curriculum is being modified to ensure that the specifics of what kids are going to need to know for that grade level is being focused on. The tasks are going to be really clear for students, whether they're in school on a particular day or at home. So for example, if your child is, let's say, in group A, and your child is attending school on Monday and Wednesday, that means on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, your child is working from home. If, let's say, your child is in group B, they would be in school on Tuesday and Thursday, meaning Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, they would be working from home. And that is what blended learning means. It's a partial in-school model. So it's part virtual learning and part in-person learning. So again, just to reinforce, if your child is doing blended learning, they will use different entrances and exits throughout the building. Your child will be assigned a class and a room that they will be in all day. There is no recess and no designated lunch period. As per the Department of Education, children will be brought their lunch, or they can bring their own lunch. They will be doing that in the classroom that they are working in. While children are working in a class like crew or potentially circles, which is a social emotional class, they will be able to eat. When they eat, they'll be able to take their masks off. And then once they finish eating, they'll have to put their masks back on again. Each classroom can maintain 10 to 13 students based on the square footage of the room and CDC's guidelines. So keep that in mind. We are going to present to you 2 different blended learning models that you can choose the best. Obviously, it's not a perfect situation, but you can pick which one you would prefer if you were going to send your child into school for the blended learning model and not fully remote. Now, again, students will be in school 5.5 hours per day. As of now, the school will be in session for students from 8:30 to 1:58. Okay. 8:30 to 1:58. Students will work from home on the days that they're not in the school building. In-person classes are dependent on, just like students have the opportunity to do a fully remote option, staff and teachers, if they have a pre-existing illness that is aligned with the CDC's guidelines for not coming to school or coming to work, some teachers will be working fully remote as well. So depending on where your teacher is, are they in the building or are they home, will dictate which classes your child will have present in class versus at home. So right now we are planning for science, math, social studies, ELA, circles and crew to be in school, art, advisory, town hall, health, and phys ed to be done remotely. I had a uniform question on the survey. Students will remain in the same color uniform. If they do blended learning, they will wear the uniform, and your child remains in the same color uniform for all 3 years, okay? So please keep that in mind. Okay. Okay. So there is the other option of remote learning, which is fully remote, meaning your child is working from home. Well, what does that look like? Remote learning, you should know, is not just here's the task, go do it and hand it in on Friday. It's synchronous, which means in person, working with groups of students, participating in webinars, instant messaging, virtual classrooms. There's collaboration and feedback with synchronous learning. Children will get a schedule when they're doing remote learning. So if you opt into the fully remote learning model, they will say from 9 o'clock to 9:20, you're going to be meeting with your science teacher. From 10:20 to 10:40, you'll be doing an activity with the guidance counselor. So depending on the way your schedule is framed, there's going to be in-person learning, and then there's going to be asynchronous learning, which is what most of you may have been working on in the spring, where you had a task, you had a series of questions, or you had a project to do, and then you were able to do research to get that done. Then you would hand that in to the teacher on the due date using Google Classroom, and then you would get feedback on that work. So if you choose the remote learning option, you will know your child will be home all day, every day. Students will have time where they're in person, online with the teacher, and then there'll be times where they will have designated time to do work. What is different from the spring with remote learning is that there's going to be a schedule for you, and the schedule, some parents had voiced to me that, you know, there was a Zoom meeting and their child went on 10 minutes later and they missed the Zoom. The schedule for when there's going to be synchronous or in-person learning is going to be the same every single day, okay? That is an option. So you're going to know when your child is face-to-face with the teacher and when your child is going to be working independently on a task. There's going to be times throughout the year, if you choose the fully remote learning option, let's say you turn around, you get the survey again in, let's say, November, and you're like, you know what, things are going well, the percentages are staying low, I'm feeling comfortable to send my kid back, my child feels comfortable to go back, I'm going to opt my child back into fully remote when you get that survey. That is absolutely an option. In terms of resources, I received that question in the survey. You will get whatever resources you need. So at the beginning of the school year, people who have chosen fully remote, whether it's a device or it's a specific book or a piece of literature, we will provide that to you and give you a time to pick that up, and we'll make sure that you have everything that you need. I know that that was a concern for a lot of parents. Once you opt into the fully remote learning option, you can't just say on a Wednesday, I'm going to send my child back. there's certain times in the year that they're going to ask you. And so during those times, you can make the decision to send your child back into the school building, because you also have to understand, because we can only fit so many children in a room, there's not a lot of flexibility with adding people in once it's calculated. Okay. So then if we have to make a decision quarterly that we have more students coming in, well, then we would make a decision with hiring more people if that were the case. So Mr. Campbell has put the link for you to opt your child into fully remote learning in the chat. And you could take that opportunity now. Remember, August 7th is the deadline. Okay. And again, we will schedule and be very transparent around when you can pick up books and resources for it. Okay, so you can go to the next slide, Campbell. Okay, so the Chancellor has put out a lot of models. Mr. Campbell is going to talk to you in a lot of detail about two models that BC and the SLT have discussed. One is what we call Model A with an exception, and the other is Model 2. In Nearpod, you guys are going to have the opportunity to participate in a poll, and I'm going to use that information to submit for an exception to the Department of Ed based on the model that you guys have chosen. So, Mr. Campbell, I turn it over to you.
All right, good evening, everyone. I hope everyone's well. I know this is difficult to process and to go through and make decisions for your students. I had my meeting with my son's school earlier today, and as a parent, it is very daunting. So I feel you. There are two models that we're looking at currently that work with our programming. Again, this is based off of a number of factors. One, how many students go fully remote. Obviously, we can't have students, how many kids we can have in the building and support in the building and maintain a safe, socially distant classroom is going to be dependent on how many students are doing fully remote instruction. Model 2, this is one of the Chancellor's 2 models that we know that we've worked out the numbers that we can support. This model has 4 cohorts of students. The first is Group D, and that is students that are working fully remotely. And so this would be any student that you feel it's not the time to send students back, or your student was really successful in remote learning and you want to capitalize on that success, then those would be students that are in this Group D, and you would be remote 5 days a week. Students that are in the blended learning model, you want to send students back to the building for some in-person instruction, then they would be assigned to one of these 3 groups, Group A, Group B, or Group C. And this is separate from their classes. Now, we have to take into a lot of account, which kids we put in which group, and we base that off of a number of things, including services, IEPs, E&L mandates, and just the number of teachers that we have available to service kids on a given day. So in Model 2, we have these 3 groups, and they attend school on one day consistently every week. So if you are a Group A student, you will always go to school on Wednesday. If you are a Group B student, you would always go to school on Thursday. And if you are a Group C student, you would always go to school on Friday. Now, the other 2 days of the week are alternating, depending on which group you're in. So a Group A kid, the first week, week 1, would go to school on Monday and Wednesday. Week 2, they would only go to school on Wednesday. And week 3, they would go to school on Tuesday and Wednesday. All right, so over the course of a 3-week cycle, every student would go to school in person 5 times over 3 weeks. We know that that's not a lot of days, but that's if we needed to do a Model 2, meaning we had enough students that wanted to come back to the school and enough families that wanted to come back to the school and opted for blended learning, then we would have to divide the school up into, smaller cohorts. Obviously, this presents a number of challenges. One, while there is 1 day a week that this is consistent, the other 2 days are not consistent. And so we know that that brings about another number of questions. But this is one of the Chancellor's models that has been presented that we know that we can support and that we can sustain if we needed to. Are there any questions about this one that I can put in the chat? Miss, if you opt for remote 5 days, our option is D. So you wouldn't say D. When you fill out that learning preference survey, with the DOE, you're going to say that you're opting into the fully remote. Okay. The other model that I'm going to be presenting is model, we're calling this 1A with an exception. And this is based off of, if we have a smaller group of students for in-person learning, again, with every socially distanced mandate in place, students in the room 6 feet apart from each other. And this is if we would only have 3 groups of students. So again, less students than we had in that other model. Group D would still be remote 5 days a week. But in this model, we have Group A coming to school consistently on Monday and Wednesday, Group B coming consistently to school on Tuesday and Thursday, and then everyone working remotely on Fridays. And we've looked at this for a number of reasons. One, we know that 3-week cycle is going to be a challenge for families. It might not line up with other schedules, work schedules, but other student schedules. And that lack of consistency on Mondays and Tuesdays, we know is difficult. And so with this model, at least we know that we can have a consistent attendance for this specific day of the week, and you don't have to worry about whether this is week 1, week 2, week 3 that we're in, and which day of the week it is, as far as Group A, Group B, or Group C. If we end up doing Model 2, we will of course provide a calendar that says very clearly whose day it is to be in the school building. But this is one of the things that we figured that we could do depending on how many students that we have working remotely and how many staff we have as well. And then the Friday remote is time for us to build in some of the extracurriculars. And also we've been talking about other ideas like advisory and building some of these checkpoints in for students. This is also a chance for us to build in some assessment time, and that way students aren't coming to school and then sitting and taking tests or assessments, that kind of thing. So utilizing that instructional time very wisely. Let me see. Will the students be allowed in the building? Okay, that's just, I'm going to address that in a minute. Is there any other questions about Model 1A? Okay. So both models 1A and Model 2, both of them reduce class size based on the state's guidance. So there won't be, more kids in a room because we're doing one or the other. We are monitoring that very carefully. And so again, a lot of this hinges on how many kids end up doing remote learning and how many kids are in the building. This is kind of a fluid thing throughout the year as they're opening up windows for people to come in and out. So we have to keep that in mind. Kids will be sitting 6 feet apart from each other, and there is a mandate to wear the mask except for during lunch. That doesn't change with either model. So the regulations around safety don't change. It's just about which days we're going to have consistent instruction on. So students will be assigned to a group in a classroom and will remain in that room all day. Students will not be moving through the building to change classrooms with either model. We will have teachers pushing into rooms, students who are selecting the blended learning model, and they will attend those days in BC. And then once we schedule people for those sections, okay, we can't change and make those changes because of the class size mandates. Students will be in the building for that full 5.5 hours and then dismissed. Like Ms. D said, they will have lunch, but it will be an instructional lunch. They'll have it during another period. It won't be a separate lunch where everybody's going to the cafeteria like they used to in the past. So school, we're trying to make our curriculum and everything as normalized as possible, but school will look differently for students. Right. In both blended learning and the fully remote learning, students are going to be engaging in that synchronous live instruction on those remote days and independent learning. So there were questions about, well, is it just going to be an assignment posted? And Misty covered this already, but I'm going to reiterate that there will be some live instruction on those days. If you are in blended learning and it's not a day that you're in the building, there will be that live instruction piece. There will also be a live instructional piece for every period for the students who are doing the fully remote. All right, so you will have the same access to the curriculum, and depending on how many students we have, okay, then we will be able to make those adjustments and give you the schedules. And so I just want to assure you that that's something that our curriculum team's already been working on. Our teachers are hard at work. We had teachers working on this last week and the week before. So we are outlining each week's learning targets for those core subject areas. We are making sure that we have clear learning tasks to demonstrate those outcomes, and so that it's very clear what students are expected to learn each week. And so both of them, whether you're working in blended learning or fully remote, it'll be through our Google Classroom platform. So as Dee said, that we're trying to make sure that students get ELA, math, science, and social studies during the day. We're also going to continue to provide art, gym, and health instruction, but those will be remotely. Crew, we're working on right now. It will probably most likely be during the day, but maybe with a remote component, depending on what that looks like. And then our social emotional supports, we still have circles in our schedules. We're planning on delivering those both in blended and remote learning. And then also we have the advisory that we're working on to make sure that students have that point of contact, that adult that's checking in with them each week. Town hall is usually an assembly period that we have every week that we give out a lot of information to students and then cover some other mandates as well. We will be broadcasting that remotely via weekly broadcast to students, so that way everybody's informed about things that they need to know specifically. There's going to be a lot of questions we know coming up this year about high school application, things like that for your 8th grade students. So that's one of those avenues that we'll make sure that everybody has access to and everybody knows what's going on. Let's see. Additionally, there were some questions about whether students are receiving their specific accommodations that are in their IEPs. That IEP, those mandates are still in effect, whether they are working fully remotely or they are working in a blended learning environment. And so we'll be working to revise that remote learning plan if students are working fully remotely. There is a high likelihood that any related services, they might continue to be delivered remotely, depending on a number of factors, but safety is our key concern. And so if it's not safe to provide a remote related service for students that have related services such as speech or OT, PT, then those services would be continue to be delivered remotely. But that's still a conversation we're having, and that's still a conversation the DOE is having. Students will still continue to receive E&L mandates. Those will be provided in an integrated fashion, so they don't miss out on any class time. Technology, students are going to need a laptop or an iPad, no matter if they're in the blended learning model or the remote learning model. We are going to be doing our best to provide equipment to families who need them. We gave out about 2/3 of our laptops in March, and so we're hoping to get those back, or unless students need them at home, because people that took those out will still be needing them. I know many of you have DOE iPads as well. So those DOE iPads have been added to the inventory of the school that the student's going to be in the fall. And so we have to figure out exactly what we need to do to make sure everybody has the technology that they need. There is a form on the DOE's website that is still active for requesting those DOE iPads. I don't know how quickly they will be getting out iPads to anybody, or if they're even distributing them anymore via that form, but it is still active. So if you need an iPad, if you need a device, it does not hurt to ask for one.
Yeah, just that point clear. So if you were in 5th grade last year in a New York City public school and you received an iPad from New York City that was mailed to your house, you will hold on to that iPad for middle school, and you will hold on to that, and then it will get turned into us whenever necessary. We're going to do our best to purchase more laptops. We gave out 250 this spring, and we're going to do our best to purchase to make sure people have them. But like Mr. Campbell said, the DOE's inventory is depleting. So I believe you can still apply for one for September. So you should do that if you really need one.
May I ask a question quickly, please?
Sure.
My son was in 5th grade last year at a charter school, and he was asked to turn in the laptop he used. So I turned that in at the end of the year. So now he doesn't have one. So I know you just said that we should have kept it, but they asked to return it.
Yeah.
So now he's out of one. I either have to buy him one, and I find that they're in kind of short demand in some stores, kind of expensive.
So we're going to do our best to get you one. Technically, you're not supposed to give it back to the schools. Sometimes, not all schools follow the rules, unfortunately. But yes, we'll do our best to make sure that you try.
Oh goodness!
Don't stress it. We'll do our best to get you something. But if you go back to the website and apply for one, hopefully they'll send you another one. But in the worst case, if you need one, we'll get you one once we return back to the school building. If your child is graduating, right now the DOE doesn't want us collecting them, but we will schedule time where we'll have someone at the front door to collect one for 8th grade students that are not going to a New York City public school. If you got a computer straight from BC, that comes back to us. But if you got a computer from the Department of Education, it travels with your child to their next New York City public school. But if your child's going to a charter school or a private school, you have to bring that item back to us. Hopefully that answers your question on the tech. So
if that computer that they lent you was a laptop from their inventory, then they could request that back. But if it was a DOE iPad, then that's something that shouldn't have been requested. So, Ms. D.
Sent it back.
You want to do the vote. So now what we're asking you to do is basically pick between these two items, these two options, Model 1A with the exception, meaning your child will either go to school Monday and Wednesday and Tuesday and Thursday and remote for all students on Friday, or Model 2, which is 3 in-person groups, breaking the building up into groups of 33.3%. And there's a weekly schedule for students. There's one day that it's consistent. So if your child's in group A, they'll be in on Wednesday, but their second day rotates. So we're going to give you guys the opportunity in Nearpod to take the survey, and we're going to use that information to make a finalized decision. But of course, it's contingent upon numbers of students that are in person and those who choose remote, as well as staff who may need an exception. So again, some of the things that came up in the chat that I was noticing that I just want to reinforce. When students come to school, they will not be switching classes. They will be assigned the classroom. If you're doing the remote, the blended learning option, your child will be coming to school 2 days a week. They will be assigned the classroom. They will not be leaving that classroom unless they have to use the restroom, because track and trace is tracing where people move. So we need to know where people are at all times. And for the majority of the time, so it's a 5.5-hour day, children will be wearing a mask the entire day, except for when they have to eat. So it's very important, because I do not want to have to call you guys during the middle of a work day to tell you your child doesn't want to wear a mask and you got to come get them. To have that conversation with your children and making this decision, it is extremely important.
So just a reminder that for everybody, August 7th is the deadline. That's this Friday to apply for the fully remote learning for your child. I'll post the link again in a second, but it's been posted a couple times in the chat too. So if you scroll up, you should see it. The learning preference survey, you fill it out, and then you can opt for students to be fully remote. If you change your mind before Friday, you could do that survey. And the default is automatically blended learning. So if you want that fully remote, you should please fill out that survey as soon as possible. Once you have done that though, you are locked in until that window. So if you choose fully remote and it's beyond Friday, you are locked into that until they open up a window for you to come back into blended learning. Okay, so I just want to make sure that that's clear for everyone.
Okay, friends.